All right. Well, David, thank you so much for coming on. This has kind of been a long time coming for us to have this conversation.
You're right. Thank you for having me on, Jordan. And I'm sorry it's taken so long, but I think under the circumstances, you have an idea of why it's taken so long. So,
yeah, your story just really, whenever I hear you talk about it, it's one of those things that just continues to stir me up with some zeal and some passion to continue to do something about this group, because it's really heartbreaking reading through that story and seeing some of what you've experienced, and I don't think there's any nice way around it. The manipulation and I feel like this group has in large part stolen away your child, and as a father, honestly, it just makes me mad. It angers me. And so, yeah, but I feel like you sharing your story in this way, what I hope it does is I hope it stirs up those sort of emotions in other people as they're listening, because I think more people need to be speaking out. There needs to be more done about this group. And I think as you'll talk about, this group would want to be identified and viewed and perceived as just another religious group, as just another belief system. And as you've explained to me, and as I 100% agree, it's not. It's much more than that.
Right. And we talked about it's taken me so long, and I do as well wish that more people would speak out, but I also understand why they don't. And, one of my biggest hesitations in doing this video, and the reason why we have to use fictitious names and cloud out faces is ultimately fear. And I sincerely fear, my wife does, my other kids do, losing what little relationship we have left with our loving, beautiful daughter. I have seen from my own personal experience, our relationship get worse and worse over the years as we just try to talk to her simply about kind of challenging her, just talking about the different aspects of this mm-hmm. church. And there's other reasons too. I know that people have gone through most of their life savings being sued by this organization. It has just devastated our lives and many others. And I finally just said, I have to speak out. So
you use the word devastation, like your family and others. You mentioned those that are being sued by this group having to empty out their life savings to defend against the attacks when certain people have spoken out. So people are being devastated by what this group does, and in your case, how it has in large part torn apart your family. And you're telling me that the reason it's very interesting that I mentioned before, this group wants to be perceived as just another religious group, but yet you feel the need right now to hide and conceal your true identity, and even to conceal certain aspects of your story out of fear of how that's going to further affect you with your relationship with your child. But ultimately it's fear of what this group will do, what they're capable of doing. And so that to me is very telling.
Right. Sure. So in my own personal experience, over the years, I have heard firsthand from my daughter's recruiter, from my daughter, that if we don't stop asking questions or we don't stop pushing back, that and this is chilling, our relationship will change. I will not see you as much. And that really has happened. I know for a fact that they will either move members to another state away from their family, or tell members that they really just shouldn't talk to their family anymore. And it really comes down to one of the elements of thought reform that we'll talk about. But the members truly believe that no one outside of the church can be trusted, that especially family and friends, so that Satan, he's a smart guy, and he not only works through you, Jordan, because you don't believe in the church, he works especially through loved ones, because they're the ones that can influence their children. And they are taught to be afraid of that and to back away from family. That's incredibly powerful and sad and devastating, like I said.
It is. Wow. And like you said, we'll hear more about that later, because I know that's a point we wanted to touch on as far as thought reform and the way this group utilizes that. But I think, what I want to do is just kind of let you share kind of your story and kind of start at the beginning. And before we do that, I just, and part of, again, what the purposes of doing this, and I think one of my goals, beyond just speaking out and bringing awareness of this group, and I think you would probably agree, is just, I hope that this provides some sort of comfort and encouragement to other parents, to other husbands and wives, friends and family who have close people in their lives that have been lost to this group as well, because that's a large number of people that are reaching out to us throughout the years we've been doing these videos. It's that category of people who is makes up a lot of the emails, a lot of the comments, is people who have lost family and friends, and they're, a lot of them lose hope. I think a lot of them feel at the end they don't feel like there's any chance of things ever going back to normal with their relationships. And again, it's causing devastation. And so I hope that, even though we may not have all the answers, we may not have all the solutions, I hope at least just by hearing your story, people are able to relate to it. And I think so many people will be able to, and that they find some encouragement and hope. I believe at the end of the day, there is hope. I think there's hope for you. And that's, my biggest desire is that you and your family would feel hope, because I'm confident, not just saying that, I know there's hope that this could change. And I think, Kelsey and others who are on the videos with us, these people who were in this group for decades, they are out and they're in the fight with us now. And so I hope that's an encouragement, that even if right now we may not necessarily see the way that that's all going to unfold, I believe that your daughter will come out ultimately. I don't think that this is the end of her story. So with that said, David, why don't you kind of tell us, go back to the beginning and talk about what were the events kind of that took place that led to your daughter joining this group?
Sure. Absolutely. And one thing, if you don't mind, because you've touched on a lot of points already. One of the other reasons that I did this video with you is you're so open-minded. As you know, I'm not real religious, but you were still very welcoming to me coming on. And I've watched your exegesis, if I've got that word correctly, and been very, very encouraged by it. But one of the biggest reasons I did this is because inadvertently, when we invite these kind of people on, and they're good people, they believe 100% in what they're doing, but they are truly, sadly, victims of a very, very powerful undue influence thought reform force that has been going on for 1,000 years. So it's been refined and it's been perfected, and that's sad. But when we give them a platform, we overlook really what they're capable of, and the
Right.
bad stuff that they can do. And that's what my story is going to reflect, really how thought reform and undue influence and how all this devastation happens, and they don't see any of it. And
They're
I
oblivious to
did
it.
see they're oblivious of it. And even if they realize it, like one of the gentlemen that spoke on your video, uh, you or someone else cornered him on a doctrinal kind of statement. And he said something very telling. He said, I really don't care if you're right. It doesn't matter because I'm happy. That
Right.
is coming from a person who is now blindly
Yes.
accepting everything that he is told, and that's the kind of the story of the rabbit hole that my daughter the daughter went down.
Yep.
Sure. Um, so go ahead if you want to.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to say I think that's an excellent point, and and what for those of you who aren't aware, what David is referring to right now is if you haven't seen it, we just recently did a 5-hour long live stream that was intended to be a Q&A where we would I had Jeremy Burgos and Kelsey Wells, both former members of the WMSCOG, who came on with me. We were just going to answer some questions we've been getting in emails and comments. It turned out that a couple current active members of the WMSCOG came into the live comment section and they started asking to join the conversation. And so we jumped on that, and that's something we were constantly kind of hoping for, is to be able to have actual dialogue with members. So they came on, we had sort of a discussion, more of a pretty intense debate at times. And so that's something you can go watch if you're interested in that on our channel. But David, what you're saying is that it's a bit concerning to you to give members like this a platform to speak. And I think I agree to an extent. I think something that was unfortunate, is pretty hard is somewhat of a chaotic conversation. So I didn't have the opportunity to reply to everything that I wanted to. And one of the things that stuck out to me that was just really eating at me, it was really difficult and frustrating that I didn't get a chance to respond to it, was one of the members continued to kind of, again, present the WMSCOG and his beliefs as if it's just another religion, and kind of like, well, I believe this, you believe that, that's okay. We're all just trying to find the truth. And there's so much that can be said about that. There's so much that is wrong about that statement. There's so much that is, I think, dangerous. And so, yeah, I agree with that. I think it's as I do those videos, I do want to give them an opportunity to share, but I think unless I'm prepared to explain why they're wrong, honestly, that might sound harsh, but I think at the end of the day, their belief system is ultimately structured on deceit, manipulation, terrible exegesis and interpretation of scripture. And so, yeah, I do think there's a certain aspect where it would be dangerous to just present it as if they're just another religious group that's okay.
I completely agree. I don't think it's harsh at all. I think saying it another way, if my favorite psychologist in this regard is Robert Lifton. And if you haven't, he has the 8 criteria for thought reform that specifically deals with high demand religions, which is very different from the kind of doctrine that you're preaching. But boiling it down is religion to them is just one of many tools they use to control people. And that's another reason I'm on with you. You don't want to control anybody. You have a very difficult time saying, hey, can you throw me $10 to support my website? You're very open-minded. They are the absolute antithesis of that. And you'll see all these forms of thought control in my story of how my daughter got involved when we started. So
yeah, good. Well, yeah. Well, with all that said, why don't you go ahead and jump into your story and share kind of how this all played out?
Sure. Okay. So very if there is such a thing as a normal family, very normal family, few kids, great wife, idyllic family upbringing. My daughter was a pretty normal kid, smart, very physically active, a real searcher, almost almost too much of a, well, not too much, but very goody two shoes. She really wanted to do good in the world. So she was on a partial scholarship at a very prestigious university that you would recognize, and went to a Christian high school, and came on one day. I think she was a sophomore or freshman, and said, "Hey, I've been going to this Bible study with a friend," and we were like, "Great, that's wonderful, love it." There's a lot of worse things you could be doing, and we were happy. And then soon after, she began asking us to come, and she started to say things, and the ex-members will know this right off the bat. Like, the church really knows the Bible well. No one else has been able to give me any answers but them. When we heard this, we were actually very excited. As you know, as well as anybody, the Bible's really tough to understand. It can be interpreted in many ways. So we were genuinely excited to go with her. So over the next couple of months, we attended, I think it was 4 Bible studies with their local pastor, deacon, or whatever they call it. And we were kind of immediately surprised. They were all private, held with my daughter and the pastor and my wife and I. And each of the studies ended up being 2 to 3 hours long. Most of them were 3 hours long, which was amazing. So that immediately, we started to see some, I'll call them yellow flags, not kind of red yet, but the pastor was very friendly, very humble acting, but that almost immediately started to change once we got in the private room. And these are direct quotes, him looking me right in the eye and saying things like, "We are the fastest growing church in the world," which immediately, that's kind of concerning.
Right.
Then he went on and he said, "All other religions are blasphemers and heretics. Our mission is to prove all other religions false." But we were absolutely humble and tolerant.
And these are actual quotes you're reading right now.
These are him looking me right in the eyes and saying this face to face in a room size of a small office. And that's when I started going, wow, these guys are really believe in what they're doing. And immediately I was like, well, how can you, and I thought to myself, how can your mission be to prove all other religions false? But in the same sentence, almost, you're saying that we're humble and tolerant of all other religions. And so as I go on, we started to realize that there was a lot of deception going on. There was a lot of just outright lies going on. So the first study then he started into, and it was the study of male and female. So it started with, you have to have kids, you have to have a male and you have to have a female. So it was kind of setting us up for the whole Mother God thing. But he didn't mention that at all. So he went through this whole big diatribe of you have to have a mother to have a father and a mother and all this sort of stuff. And we left. And the thing was, he jumped around in the Bible from verse to verse, from book to book. We couldn't keep up. It was
Just
very
disoriented.
confusing,
Yeah.
very disoriented, and we left very confused and concerned, but still very open-minded. We were like, yes, we want to come back, and we left and went home. And I looked up the name of this church, and that's when the yellow flag started to turn to red, but we were still open-minded. So, I asked my daughter a week later, who's this Mother God, and is she actually alive and living in Korea? And she wouldn't comment. The only thing she said was, "Wow, you did some research online, didn't you?" And I said, "Yes, I did. Why not?" We went back to our second Bible study, and the first thing the pastor said was, "Listen, if you have any questions about our church, don't go on the internet. Just come and ask me." Verbatim, face to face. That's exactly what he said.
It's almost creepy.
Yeah, it is almost creepy. Yeah. Yep. And then after during the second 3-hour study, he started to go to a different level, saying that only the World Mission Society Church of God knows the perfect truth about how to interpret the Bible and about how to be saved. So any other church, this is what he was getting to. Any other church, you're going to hell. And it went further. And this is absolutely 100% true. The Pope is the Antichrist. All pastors in other religions are of Satan. That includes you, Jordan.
Yeah.
And anyone, including family and friends who do not get baptized, are influenced by Satan and cannot be trusted. And that's right in one of their books. And he wasn't. He kind of took the gloves off. At the end, he started to say, "You really need to hurry up and get baptized because time is running out." And he did the study of the different periods in time and showed us that we were in the last days. Time is running out, so you better get baptized fast, because the gate is narrow. Only we will go to heaven. And Jordan, these are absolutely verbatim. When I really started to kind of give him the face is when he said, we were talking about Christmas, and he said, wrote on the chalkboard, "Santa equals Satan," because you can spell it in that way. And I looked at him and I go, "Are you kidding me?" And he, said, "No, I'm not kidding you." It just kind of deteriorated. I started asking him about what was on the internet, and he said, "Anyone who says anything bad about our church, they are all liars." And we left that one going, uh-oh. What we didn't realize is, and this is just foreshadowing, but she was already so caught up in this that there was nothing we could do. We didn't even realize it yet. We went back for another study and asked, "Hey, listen, you've really got to go over everything you've gone over to date because it's very confusing. It doesn't make sense." And he did, but he was visibly frustrated. And we started to ask some questions. That he really couldn't answer or didn't do a very good job answering. And I'm not a Bible expert at all.
Right. Well, it's it's something where you see that they are taught very specific studies, and they're very well trained at those studies. So they know how to do their specific studies, as long as their structure of this verse follows this verse, and then after that verse, we go to this verse, and after that, we go to this, and voila, we have our doctrines. They are very good at that because they practice it. They have, I think they call it Elohim Academy or something like that, where they have groups that they help each other train, they practice. And so I've definitely noticed that in my own discussions with them, that when they're in the middle of that, when they're in the middle of one of their lessons, and if you interject a question, if you interpose something that doesn't make sense, it visibly frustrates them. They don't know how to handle that, because they're so trained to just go through this teaching and expect that those who you're teaching it to are just going to kind of take it hook, line, sinker. And so when that doesn't happen, like you said, they get visibly frustrated.
I saw that just before my own eyes. And what was worse was my daughter, who was always very inquisitive and actually got in trouble for school for asking too many questions, was just nodding and making faces at me when I asked these questions. I could see what Kelsey and what Jeremy and others say. They really discourage asking questions. So that we left that meeting, and both my wife and I feigned interest, but we were frightened. And that's when she used to come over all the time, and we would try to talk to her about, hey, listen, I found this on the internet. What do you think? Why don't you just take a break, and so on and so forth. And to our astonishment, she became increasingly defiant and argumentative with our entire family, saying that every piece of advice you give me is wrong. I can't trust you anymore. You don't know what you're talking about. And this is like 100% different than it just changed. And you can start, and now I realize that she was being indoctrinated and taught not to trust her family. So, and then if I did make a good point, you could see that conflict, that cognitive dissonance. She would get angry, and she would cry, and then go back after the next day. And I still see this. You could tell that she had worked with her pastor and stuff like that to figure it out and come back and be just as defiant. And she was being totally controlled.
You used you kind of described it before we started today, as we were talking before, that she would go away when you'd present things that were obviously difficult for her, that were really challenging her thinking. She would go away and kind of recharge her batteries, is the way you described it. And she would kind of go to the WMSCOG because facts were draining the battery, and she had to go get refilled with kind of the manipulation and the deception again, kind of get a refill of that.
Yep. And that's exactly what happened. And that's kind of what I see to a lesser extent with people that are in longer, like the people that you were talking to during your last video. They'll push back a little bit, but when they get cornered, they simply just stop and they block it all out. Mm-hmm. And they say something like, I don't care what you say, I'm happy. And that is the sad but dangerous thing. Because, well, I'll tell you what happened was, at that point, we were desperate, and we went on and we started contacting several of the top psychologists in the world on cults, and that's when the bottom dropped out. every one of them said the same thing. Do whatever it takes to get her away from that group as fast as possible. This is a dangerous and especially challenging group to deal with. And from that time on, everything that they told us happened. It was like a prophecy that really came true. And that was sad. Then we started to realize that this was a really insidious, high demand religion. Her behavior we didn't say anything to her. She stopped going on any vacations. We used to go all over the place. She stopped participating in all of her favorite hobbies, which she had several deep hobbies. And what she would say was, I have to stay close to the church because there are souls to save. And if I go on vacation with you for a few days, that means I might let a soul go. I can't do that. And that just escalated our fear and our desperation. She started going to church on Saturday and would say, I'm only going on Saturday. What's the big deal? It would be all day. But then she started to go on Friday, then Tuesday, then Sunday, then Wednesday. And then it was 4:00 a.m. She would wake up and go to church, and she would come home at 11 at night. We went from seeing her 4 times a week to maybe once a month. And this happened within a 2-month period. It was just in a blink of our eyes and in hindsight. And it just got worse from there. Anytime we tried to question her, she would say, come into the church. You got to come into the church. Anytime I would show her something from the examining site or from one of the Korean lawsuits, she wouldn't even look at it. She would just say, oh, it's all lies. And I saw this in your other video as well, when the gentleman said, oh, I've been on the website and I've looked through the website. But when someone asked, what did you look at and when? His reply was, oh, I can't remember what I looked at. And this was years ago. So this is what my daughter does. Oh, I've read all the books you have and more, Dad. And then I'll say, give me an example of one of them that is not a World Mission Society book. And she can't do it. Yeah. So it's very obvious that they're paying lip service, but they don't do any real research. So,
and isn't that, I know it might be jumping ahead a little bit, but isn't that a distinguishing mark of, I mean, we could say a cult. We know what the reply to calling them a cult would be. It'd just be to call every other group a cult. But so, yes, it's a distinguishing mark of a cult, but more than that, a distinguishing mark of brain control and some of these things that we're going to get into, I think, here in a minute.
Yeah, and we are discussing many of the elements of thought reform right now. We're just not explaining the words and the definitions and things like that. I thought about getting into that, but that's a whole nother animal. But yes, there's at least 10 different elements of thought reform going on right now. And it is real and it is powerful. And that's, just been our absolute experience in this whole thing. So, I'll just kind of continue with the story, because it just continues to get worse. On Thanksgiving, she came home and said, and this is, keep in mind, this is a tolerant religion. she came home and said, if anybody says a prayer at the table, I can't eat. And we're like, what? I won't eat. I'll just walk out of the room. I'm like, okay, but aren't you tolerant of all religions? And she's like, yeah, but I just won't eat. So we did a silent prayer. And then Christmas, she came home and we had a Christmas tree up and decorations, and she blew a gasket and screamed at us and said, don't you realize that you are going to hell for doing this? Which was amazing to us. And of course we got in a fight and she left in a huff, but we took all the Christmas decorations down. So, what was happening was that, we had nurtured this beautiful young lady for 20 years, and she was turning against us, and toward people that she barely even knew. And it all, to me, it's amazing to think about. But once you understand the elements of thought reform, it makes sense. She was turning against us because she believed that we were influenced by Satan. So at that point, we hired. We went through a couple of different cult experts, and very educated, very knowledgeable teams of people. They'd have a guy like you that was more of an expert in the Bible, an ex-member that was there, and then the main psychologist. And it was helpful, but going through the entire process, at the end of the process, which ultimately failed, even the top guy said, David, I am sorry, but we were wholly unprepared for how well they prepared themselves to deal with cult experts and people trying to get them out of this group. So they were prepared. They were 3 steps ahead of us every time we tried something. And we now know that through talking to Kelsey and Jordan, some of the others, that as soon as you're baptized, you're brought to a class, and they say, okay, here's the type of people you have to watch out for. They have videos on that subject, and they prepare them, to be talked about. So,
and let me stop you right there, because I think that what you just said is something that needs to be reset and reemphasized. That you had these leading cult experts with these different people involved in that, and they were surprised and unprepared for how well trained and how well prepared this group is for any sort of opposition. And I'm repeating that to say, I hope people listening will wake up a bit. And I know everybody's not necessarily called or should necessarily get involved to the extent that somebody like I am, or even that you are, but this group is growing. This group is evangelizing passionately on the streets every Saturday, every Sunday, and probably days between. And there has to be awareness brought to people. People need to know about this. And I would hope more people start to speak out and to do something about it. And if what you just said isn't convincing enough to show that that's the case, then I don't know what is, because that's kind of scary to hear that coming from these cult experts who deal with all sorts of crazy groups with crazy doctrines, with members who have been manipulated, and for them to look at this one and say they were unprepared for it. That's kind of a scary reality that I hope wakes people up a little bit.
that was scary. It actually gets worse, and I'll reiterate one thing. When they said, and this was multiple, probably 4 different ones, they said the World Mission Society Church of God is one of the most difficult to deal with. And their first advice was get her out any way you can and do it now. Because once they get in and they get fully indoctrinated, it's extremely difficult to get them out. And the thing that you just mentioned about they're growing and evolving is another very well proven element of thought reform and the Robert Lifton's element. They change when they see the controversy and the pushback coming.
Yes.
They get in there and they figure out how to get around it. And they've done it in many ways, from reaching out and having these little public cleanups that cost them no money, and they advertise it in the paper and on the TV. They have family days where they're told, you got to go see your family because we're getting a bad rap, with families. And that's the sad part, but they evolve. So the kind of the beginning of the end for us was we had a couple of failed intervention attempts, and on the day after Christmas, she was home from college, and we had prepared some documents and things like that, and to talk to her about, and she woke up and we said, hey, can we talk about this? We love you. We care about you. We want to talk about the World Mission Society Church of God. Bam. She walked upstairs and within 60 seconds walked down with her bag of clothes. She had already had her bags packed and ran out the door and ran away from home. And ran to the church, and that was really the beginning of the end, and that was one of the final shocks. We later got a call from the pastor. Hey, listen, I've got a girl here who is very upset and distraught and crying. What have you done? And that started our conflict with the pastor. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, if you want to see her, you have to come to the church and you have to listen to, another Bible study. That was the ultimatum, which we did. And
so
go ahead.
I'm sorry. That to me is, that sounds like a hostage situation to me more than
blackmail. Absolutely, blackmail. Yep.
So, is that another example of something, maybe not necessarily verbatim, but you're telling me he was on the phone with you, telling you if you want to see your child again, you have to come to our Bible study, and maybe he wouldn't have said this specifically, but ultimately it would be, unless you embrace what we're going to tell you at this Bible study, things aren't going to look good for you and your relationship with your daughter. Right. So he knew he had this. He had this hold over you. He had this position now of leverage over you. Right.
Complete leverage. And here's the thing. We've talked about this. I'm really not convinced about the whole religion thing. But I truly want to believe. And I told him this flat out. Prove to me, bring me into your flock. And I think he was still partly holding on to that. But you're right. He had ultimate, absolute leverage over our family with our daughter. So we went in, and I will say this, we didn't make it through the whole Bible study this time. And I just flat out said, because even up to this, 8 hours of Bible study up until this point, never once did he mention that there was a mother God or that the mother God was alive. And I finally had to ask him, is there a God the mother? Yes. And I said, well, prove it. Show it to me in the Bible. I had counted at this point, there are 1,300 references to God in the Bible, God the Father. There are 400 references to Jesus. But if you do a simple search, there are 0 references to God the Mother. And it just kind of blew up. My wife was upset. We told him that we didn't believe and told him really what we thought, and got up, left. My daughter stayed and said, wow. Let me back up. We were so desperate that we said, listen, honey, at this point, we think your decision-making process is broken down a bit. And if you're going to behave like this, we can't in good conscience continue to pay for your college if you're just not going to even have the most basic of loving discussions with your parents who have raised you for 20 years. And it was instant. Oh, I'll get a job. And a week later, she dropped out of college. I had some terse emails with the pastor who said, I'm going to get her in another local college. You just wait and see. You're a terrible human. You're a terrible father. Your wife is terrible. Your whole family is terrible. You have destroyed this young lady's mind and taken everything from her. Was just as nasty as you could ever be. And that's pretty much when we realized that it was over. We had lost. So,
Wow.
So that's kind of that was, like I said, that was pretty much the end.
Wow.
Today, I don't know. There were other things happened. So her local college kicked the group off campus, and they came back 2 or 3 times, to the point where they were calling me, going, "Hey, your daughter and her friends are sneaking around campus, staying kind of off to the side of the local church they have on campus, and waiting till people leave, and hitting them up right there."
Proselytizing, yeah.
And yes. And we found out that that's what they do. And we can go through undue influence all day long. All the aspects are used. They will lie. They will restructure their own memories to tell you how miserable their lives were, and how beautiful they are now. And it's all to convince you to step up and get baptized.
Right.
So
wow. That's
Yeah.
intense. And that's, the way the pastor handled that. This is somebody who is, according to them, supposed to be, kind of the leader within this group, the example, the one who has the truth, who knows the truth about God and is teaching it to others. And the way he treated you, it sounds like, in that conversation, even if, perhaps I'll give him the benefit of the doubt of him being sincerely convinced that he was, that this is the truth that he has.
Doing the right thing.
But it sounds like the complete and total lack of any sympathy or any sort of compassion or empathy toward you and your wife, and what this was like for you. Again, like you keep emphasizing, they were taking away your child who you had loved, you had taken care of for 20 years, and turning her against you, and for them to not show any sort of empathy. I mean, for one thing, what that tells me is that's just another piece of evidence that this group cannot be put in the category with another religious group like Protestant Christianity, because the thought that I think if any pastor in any sort of respectable church acted that way, probably in many cases he'd be fired or severely reprimanded, or put on a leave of absence or something. So that to me is just shocking, and I think that's one of the key things. Actually, as I was reading through your story this morning, that really got me stirred up. And again, I want to give, I believe that for the most part, a lot of these pastors and members, they do believe that this is the truth.
Right.
But it's crazy to me that they can't see that the natural ability to have and feel empathy for another human being, the indoctrination of their perception of what you are, that to them you have been demonized, you and your wife, you've been demonized, you've been called all these different things. You are of the devil, you're deceived, you're blind, all these things. And so that when they look at you, because of that sort of indoctrination, I think that's probably at the heart of what it just made them completely almost robotic in their ability to have any sort of human empathy toward you and what you guys were feeling in that situation.
Yeah. And that's robotic is a good way to put it. And that's the sad realization that our relationship with our daughter today is almost robotic. It's very, very strange to talk to someone that you've raised and loved for 20 years and to have them walk through the door and you can see it on her face that she's like kind of nervous, that she's like, oh my gosh, is Satan going to jump out and that sort of thing. And to your point about the pastor, I'll give you another example that happened during this entire process. You and I are a lot alike. We question everything, and I see you second guessing yourself all the time, and I love it. I am the same way. I second guess myself all the way through this. And one of the things that the pastor said was, why can't you just be supportive of your daughter like a normal, good parent would, and like all the other parents of kids in the World Mission Society Church of God are? And I thought, wow, that's a good point. And I went out and I said, okay, I'm going to find out what other parents feel like. And I have a research knack, and I was able to. She was now living with 3 or 4 other people in a 1-bedroom apartment, which is very common. And they definitely isolated her completely. And I found out her roommates' names, and I researched and called their parents. And this was flabbergasting and frightening to me. Not just 1 or 2 of the parents, every one of the 4, actually it was 5 because there was another one, the 5 parents I called all said the same thing. No, we do not like the group. Yes, we believe it is a bad organization, but we are afraid to do anything because our daughters will end our relationships with us. So we just either give up or we tolerate it. And that's one of the reasons I really wanted to speak out, because so many people have just given up and said, this is too emotionally draining. It just crushes our soul every day. So we just have to move on with our lives. And that is exactly what the World Mission Society Church of God wants to happen. They want people to give up so they can completely control people's lives.
Wow. That is intense and disturbing. And so, we've talked about how we don't think it's safe or right to allow this group to kind of categorize themselves as just another group. And so I'm curious, as you've kind of experienced this yourself, as you've done research, as you've thought through these things, I wonder from your perception, how do you see this group being different than more of a, I guess as an example would be like a belief system that I hold to, a more of a Protestant historical Christianity sort of perspective. When you obviously the WMSCOG is claiming to be Christianity, it's claiming to be the truth and the ultimate way to understand Christianity. But from your perception, your experience, what differences do you see between the two?
Sure. So that really, and I'm going to encourage you and your listeners to go and look up Robert Lifton's 8 criteria for thought reform, because like I mentioned before, that really deals with a high demand religion, and that in essence is the difference between the World Mission Society and what you believe. You are very open. You're very questioning. You and I have talked about everything, including agnosticism and atheism. And I know you've had people like that on your talks before. And you don't use anything in Christianity as leverage. That is, I think, the key that I mentioned before. The World Mission Society, Church of God, they use religion as a tool. It's a tool, just like isolation is, just like the what they do when they take it to another level. Your God, Jordan, is out there somewhere. Jesus was around 2,000 years ago. Their God is better than yours because their God is actually alive and living in Korea. So just think about it from the perspective of, if you really believe that, Jesus has come back and he was your wingman on this show, that's going to be pretty impactful. Yeah. And that's another way that they can just say, hey, we got it right because our God is actually alive and living. So, there's many different criteria, but all the stuff Steve Hassan is another great kind of resource. Control of communication. So when my daughter left for the first time, I was arguing with her in the parking lot, and she was literally on the phone with her pastor, who was telling her what to say to me as I was just pleading with her to come back. And she was just parroting what the pastor said. Control of environment. She has no interaction other than her job. She has no interaction with anyone outside the church. She lives with the church. When she comes over to the house, she literally can't talk about anything other than her job outside of the church, because she doesn't have anything else to talk to. Information control is a huge one. That was very evident when we went through 8 hours of Bible study and they didn't tell us anything about Mother God. Groupthink is another one. They are so isolated within their group that nothing from outside gets in, because again, everybody outside is influenced by the devil. So it really is kind of a us against them, and you'll see that over and over kind of philosophy. So you're kind of getting into a
Yep.
Pandora's box here. We could talk about it, but in essence is, I was a Christian for a long time. Went to Catholic school, went to Presbyterian for a while. Never during any of that time did I feel threatened, or did I feel like someone was trying to coerce me into believing. It was just like you. If you want to talk to me about it, I'm here. If not, it's okay too. It's very, very, it's the antithesis with the Church of God.
Yeah. It's interesting that how you described it, as they use religion as a tool rather than actually.
Yes.
I think that's something that I've kind of perceived, and I think that puts good words to something I've thought about. What they do with the Bible, the way I look and I'll read their studies, I'll read their doctrines, and it makes me cringe because of how terribly, how dishonestly, how irresponsibly they interpret the Bible. And what it tells me is exactly what you just said, that they're not people who are in any sense of humility and reverence for what Jesus taught or what the scriptures teach, trying to submit themselves to that and to whatever it says, but rather they are coming into the Bible with somewhat of a preconceived goal and idea of what they want the Bible to be used for. They have their agenda, and so they are using the Bible and rather than submitting and trying to actually figure out, what does this say? What did Jesus teach? They go into the Bible and they take what they want and they mold it, shift it, form it to produce a certain teaching that aligns with their agenda for their members. And it's I mean, I know we've talked before about how all of this experience has really harmed your faith in many in great ways. I think it's harmed your faith in God, which I can 100% understand why that would be the case. But to be honest, I've had multiple times over the years as I've dealt with this group where my faith has actually been greatly encouraged by dealing with this group. And the reason I say that is because I have seen so vividly the difference between a group that is using the Bible as a tool and those that are actually submitting to the actual teachings of Jesus. This group puts on display what it looks like to not actually care about or honor or regard the teachings of this man, Jesus. But I see a whole nother side of that. And I'm not claiming that's me, but I've seen that in my own personal relationships with other people who I see are not perfect, are flawed, are weak, make mistakes, but at their core, they want to follow what Jesus taught. And the fruit, if you want to call it that, or the character that produces in those type of people is so in such stark contrast to what I see coming out of these guys that it's almost been, to me, it's been this encouragement of like, oh man, wait a minute. The fact that this group has it wrong, that doesn't prove that the whole thing's wrong. That just has proven to me that there's actually a right way to follow Jesus that actually produces good things, but there's a deceptive way to handle his teachings that produces just destruction and devastation in people. And so that's been interesting for me to kind of perceive. And I think the way you said that just puts good words to kind of what I've perceived, that they aren't, I don't think, ultimately submitting themselves to Christianity and trying to actually understand ultimately, I think, what Jesus taught. They want to use Jesus as their tool and his words to accomplish their agenda. I'm not claiming to know what that is exactly. My opinion is that it involves money. In large part, my guess is in large part it involves the money and the power that the high ups in this group attain through this.
Yep.
You see that through the coercion for members to tithe, the threatenings that go behind their doctrines about tithing that involves ultimately hell if you do not tithe. And they might argue against that, but ultimately, if you have a member who's not tithing, there's so much, they're looked down upon so much. They're ultimately, if we've heard so many stories about, if members lose their jobs, well, they're just told not to come back to the church because they don't care about these people. That's the harsh, sad, again, reality that makes me so angry is they don't care about your daughter. And I'm not saying that's a blanket statement for every individual, but I think as a whole, this group, I don't believe that pastor ultimately cares about your daughter's well-being. This organization cares about how they can manipulate and use your daughter and other people to serve their agenda. And that is something that's what Jesus, those are the kind of people, that's the sort of structured organizations that Jesus disliked the most, and that he had the worst, most harshest, most intense rebukes for. And so I think if Jesus was here, he would be completely standing with you in your anger and your I think, sympathy toward what these people are and what they're doing to your family.
I totally agree. One of the points that someone made to me during this process was, Kevin, if you or David, if you step back from religion completely and you read the Bible, you were an adherent of no denomination, and you read the Bible, what do you think the chances are that you would come away from your reading of the Bible and believe that there's a mother God and that she's a Korean lady that's actually alive living in South Korea? And that speaks to the cognitive dissonance and the black and white thinking. It's so powerful that they can actually, believe this, and everything they do is, you're so right, is geared. They will lie, cheat, do whatever they need to do because they truly believe that they are saving your soul. And when you talk about, the members believing that, they believe it 100%, they're good people. When you start to think about the higher ups, I think we're speculating, but it's someone has to know that this is a deception and a bunch of BS.
I feel little doubt that the woman Zongil Jia, she knows what she's doing. She knows. She does not have omnipotence. She is not hearing. I mean, their doctrine teaches that, members pray to her, and she feels their pain. She knows their needs. And it's like, she knows she's not hearing these people's prayers. When members go to South Korea to visit her, they make them wear name tags so she even knows who they are. She has to ask them what they do for a job. This. Right. It's again, I do make that distinction that you just made between the members, who I feel like there is a lot of ignorance within what they're doing. They believe that what they're doing is right. And in the way they evangelize, they believe they're doing what's best in some cases for us. I don't think that lets them completely off the hook, but I think the higher ups, Ju Chul Kim, Zongil Jia, again, it's my opinion. I know this is speculation, like you said, but I feel like they know what they're doing. And those are the ones who, man, I hope justice is brought to them, whatever that looks like. I hope they're led to repentance ultimately, and they acknowledge what they're doing is wrong. That's possible. I think it's less likely, but ultimately I hope there's a stop put to what they're doing. Yeah. So
me too.
So this has been, I imagine, a very difficult experience and continues to be for your family. So how are you guys holding up, especially with holidays coming up? I feel like this would probably be maybe even a little bit of a more difficult time to kind of be living with this reality.
Sure. So that's a good question, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Um, we don't want sympathy. Um, our life goes on, but the truth is, every person in our family uh, lives every day with silent grief, and my story is one of hundreds, if not thousands. You you can't explain, you can't talk to your loved one about the way you feel because it will fall on deaf ears. Likely because they teach them that we're influenced by Satan. When we try to, uh, she gets very angry. She laughs at us. She will call us crazy and belittle us and blame every single thing that has happened on us. Um, so that's what I mean about this surreal kind of bizarre relationship. Your own daughter, you feel like you just don't even know anymore. She has no lives on a menial job. One of the top students, like I said, academic scholarship, has no interest in continuing her college education anymore. She has only very superficial relationships with our family or any of her friends, which she may talk to her friends once a year. Except for her job, it's her life is completely taken up by the church. She will not go to any funeral or any wedding if it has anything to do with stepping into another church.
Yeah.
So she'll go to a reception, she'll go, but if you have to step into another, there's that lovely tolerance they have again.
Right.
She won't,
Right.
she won't do it. We do, when she comes over, like I mentioned, we do see that cognitive dissonance. So the last time she came over, we talked about Noah's Ark, I think, or something like that, where she said it's or evolution, and she'll say something like, "Well, there's a fish on top. We found fish bones on top of a mountain, so that proves Noah's Ark." And I'm like, "Well, okay, that's interesting. Have you looked at any other possibilities, like the movement of tectonic plates and the fact that what yesterday was 30 feet underwater today is the top of Mount Everest?" And that you see her stop and start to think a little bit, but then immediately she'll fluff it off and block it out and change the subject. And then the next day she'll call back and be irate and just say, "You have no idea what you're talking about," so on and so forth. Just leave me alone. Have a nice day. So it's not a good relationship. It's sad, but I will say this too. My story is actually a light story. The people that I have become friends with that have been in the same situations have kids and grandkids that are being leveraged and used as blackmail tools in this way. And it's horrible. So it's tough, but what we do, and if you don't mind, this is kind of all rolling into
Mm-hmm.
what I've learned, the mistakes we've made, and kind of the best advice.
Mm-hmm.
And my best advice to you is, if you as a parent realize that your loved one is going to this church, get them, act as fast as possible. We failed. The other people that we talked to failed. That they look at it, like you and I have spoken about, as just another religion. And if they get a month or two in there, it's much more likely that they'll they'll never get out. I have talked to a couple people that have literally not quite kidnapped their kids, but said, come, let's get lunch, and driven them to another state. One person got his son out, and his son came to him 3 months later and said, Dad, this is heartbreaking. Dad, I want you to know something. When you got me out and got me some counseling, I told you that I didn't believe anymore, but really I did. All that happened was I came to the conclusion that I would rather live with you for all eternity in hell rather than live in heaven without you. That's how strong the pull, the fear can be used in this thought reform. And so that's the first advice. Get them out as quickly as possible by any means necessary. The second thing is, don't get angry. You said it today when you read my story, my blood boils. Well, everybody's blood boils, and you have a tendency to get angry and say, how can you believe this sort of craziness? When you do that, they are waiting for that to happen. And they look at members and go, see, they're angry now at Satan coming out of them. This is all in the prophecy. And so keeping a loving, non-judgmental line of communication open is absolutely critical. And maybe the hardest part.
Yes.
For a lot of people. So the only other thing is, and this works for a while, is try to arouse that cognitive dissonance in them. They, especially early on, they are struggling. They know they're back of their mind. They're like, this doesn't make sense. But everything else, the love bombing, the fear, the carrot of heaven and the fear of hell, are pulling on them so strongly. And at least early on, this happened with me, and it's happened with others. You catch them really thinking, and that may kind of wake them up. But as time goes on, you get to the point where you're the guy that was in your last video he is completely and utterly he's done that cognitive dissonance. He's just kind of swept it under a rug. And the last thing is, get involved, and as painful as it is, stay involved. I would not be here without people like you, without people on the Examining, the World Mission Society Church of God website, various On Song Hong. There's one I think you mentioned.
The blog spot. Yes, very good. Very helpful site.
Yes, wonderful. Rick Ross, Steve Hassan, all these kind of people. There are tons of people out there that have been affected by this church. And I haven't spoken about the ex-members. Most of the ex-members they're done. They just want to live their lives. They don't want to waste any more time. In fact, one of the big ex-members that I talked to, I asked him, what is the worst thing about this group? And he looked at me and he said, David, I wasted 15 years of my life, thrown it away, and now I'm starting over. 15 years, he's 45 years old, just getting married, just got his degree, that sort of thing, just started a family at 45, when he should have been doing that at 30. So I understand that people want to just give up and live their lives, But if you can get involved, stay involved, push back in any way, shape, or form you can.
That's all I feel excellent advice, and I that's coming from a lot of experience and also heartache. And yeah, so again, I kind of like we said at the beginning, I know at the end of the day, it's hard because we have to go away from this video and have to even end that bit of encouragement, knowing that, a lot of people like you still have, the reality is your family's still in this group, and there's limited things you can do. But I hope that,
right.
I hope again, just by hearing your story, by hearing some of that encouragement, that people have at least some direction for the next step. And then, you might not see the full path, but just take the next step. I do believe there is hope. I do believe there's a lot of wisdom and things like you said. And I mentioned, and I made I think it was the first video I made directed toward people with family and friends. It's just a short 8-minute video or so. But one of the things I mentioned was, as an encouragement or advice, was something similar to you said. I thought there's a verse in the book of James where he says, "Be slow to speak and quick to hear." And I think that goes a long way with these members. I think you have to know when is the right time to say something and when it's not, with whether it's your family or friend who's in this group, because you might think you can argue them out of this group. But you have to be careful with that, because I think sometimes if you don't do it at the right time, if you don't do it in the right way, if you aren't really as prepared to say what needs to be said, I think really can almost tend to drive them deeper into it. And so I don't say that to want to like scare people away from dialoguing with them and from, like you said, trying to encourage the cognitive dissonance and trying to cause the seeds of doubt. I'm just saying there's a time and place for that. And my prayer would be that God would give people that wisdom. When do I say something? When do I wait? When do I just love them, be patient, show that I'm still there for them, even if they don't necessarily embrace or accept me for who I am. I embrace and accept and love you for who you are. And then when the time is right, you say something. When you have the opportunity, say something. I think continue to do your research. I think the more you know about this group, the longer you study it and you understand kind of the ins and outs, you understand what is making them think the way that they think, it's going to be much easier, I think, to know what to say and when to say it.
Jordan, that is a very, very good point. And that's one of the first rules in dealing with cognitive dissonance. The advice is, when you say something that is really solid and you can see the person stop and think, stop. Don't dump a mountain on them. Just stop. Plant that one seed and stop, because if you do keep on going, that's when cognitive dissonance blockout starts. And you're absolutely right. They shut down. They're trained to do that. It's very effective. So everything you said was right on. Very impressive.
And also, that's something that I'm not just saying to other people, that's something I have to continue to learn as well. And I have to strive to stay within that, especially when we have these moments where we have members in a live conversation coming on and talking with me. It's easy for me to even slip into that place of just wanting to pile on as many arguments, just immediately show them, okay, you're wrong here, this is wrong, this is dumb, this is stupid. That's kind of the knee-jerk response when I'm in a conversation that I think we want to get them out of it as quickly as we can. Right. But the reality is that rarely works. And what I think works better than anything probably is going to be very patiently walking this thing out and embracing the fact that this is probably going to take some time. It's probably going to be a frustrating process, but I think what ultimately will pay off more than anything is whether it's in a single conversation or a long-term relationship, that you are patiently giving them some space, letting them say what they want to say, and then responding with the right things at the right time. And so all that to say, I have to, I'm giving that advice to myself as well as to
Yep.
anyone else. So
Me too. Absolutely.
yeah.
Good points.
Well, David, I have one final question, and I hope this is okay to ask. This isn't one that I sent you, and so feel free to answer or not. But the last question I had is do you have anything, if you could say to your daughter, if you could say one thing, if you could communicate one thing clearly, what would that be? And I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, but
No. Well, it's deceptively simple, and that's that I, my wife, our other children will always love you unconditionally. You just need to kind of resonate that we will always love you unconditionally for the rest of our lives. And the fact is, this is just a fact. The people in the World Mission Society Church of God will not. If she decided to leave, or any member decided to leave, that love stops. And you are, again, influenced by Satan. So that is simply, it's it. That's it. I love you. Wish you the best, and I'll always be there for you.
That's great. Well, I don't think I need to add anything to that. So, David, thank you so much. Thank you. I know there's sort of a risk involved in you being willing to come on, even with using a false name. I know there's still that, and I think it's good that you're willing to do that. I think it's you're in many ways with this conversation, you're kind of making a statement to the WMSCOG that their desire to have you kind of lay down and give up is not going to work. And I think that this conversation will be helpful for a lot of people in a lot of different situations surrounding this group. So just thank you so much for coming on and sharing. Well,
you're very welcome. Thank you for being so open-minded and being so thoughtful. And yes, there is a risk, but for me now, becoming so friendly and with other ex-members and parents there's so many beautiful, decent people out there that want to fight, and that's, for me, that is worth the risk. And it's also worth the risk if as they say, if one person sees a video like this and says, wow, I gotta do something, then it's worth that risk. So thank you for having me on.